All right, diving right in. We're going deep today. This deep dive, it's all about the Fountainhead. Well, not exactly the film itself. We're actually looking at a fictional podcast episode about the 1949 movie.
Oh, that's a cool take. A deep dive on a deep dive, huh?
Exactly. We'll be unpacking all the big themes. Individualism versus collectivism. Architectural innovation. The price an artist pays for sticking to their vision.
Those are some pretty big ideas to tackle.
They are, but that's what makes it so interesting, right? It's like stepping into Howard Roark's shoes, this architect who refuses to compromise his artistic integrity.
It's fascinating how this fictional podcast takes what's already a complex story and adds another layer of analysis. It really gets to the heart of why the Fountainhead still has this power to provoke discussion, even today.
Yeah, it's like they're digging into the why of it all. So Howard Roark, he's the main character, and he's all about his artistic vision. Not fame, not fortune, just principles.
Uncompromising, you could say. Which is interesting because did you know the actor who played Rourke, Gary Cooper? He wasn't even a fan of the novel.
Really? I didn't know that. That's pretty wild. Gary Cooper playing Howard Roark, and he didn't even like the book. Makes you wonder what drew him to the role then.
Right. He wasn't really known for these kinds of roles either. But he delivers such an iconic performance. Makes you think about actors and how they embody characters, even those that might clash with their own beliefs.
Adds a whole other dimension to his performance, for sure. Okay, so we've got Roark, this unyielding artist, and then on the flip side, there's Peter Keating. Total opposite. He embodies conformity, willing to compromise his integrity for a taste of success.
He's almost like this cautionary tale, isn't he? Representing that societal pressure to conform, that little voice that tells you to play it safe, trade your ideals for acceptance.
It's like that age-old question, do you stay true to yourself even if it means getting knocked down? Or do you try to fit in even if it means sacrificing who you are?
Tough choices, for sure. And then there's Dominique Francon, such a complex character. She's drawn to Rourke, captivated by his individuality. But she's also afraid for him. She knows how the world treats people who dare to be different.
And to make things even more interesting, there's that little tidbit about Patricia Neal, who played Dominique, and Gary Cooper. They had a real-life affair during filming.
Oh, wow. Talk about blurring the lines between fiction and reality.
Right. It definitely makes you wonder how their off-screen relationship might have affected their on-screen chemistry. Adds another layer to their dynamic, that's for sure.
Hmm?
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how the film uses architecture as a visual language. Rourke's buildings, they're not your typical structures. They're modern, bold, almost revolutionary.
They definitely stand out, especially compared to the architectural trends of the time. Think cantilevered structures, minimalist designs, a complete rejection of the ornate, more traditional
They're
style.
like physical representations of his philosophy, right?
Mm.
A visual manifestation of his fight against conformity.
Exactly. And then you contrast that with the buildings designed by characters like Keating. They lack that same spark. They often feel cluttered, uninspired.
The film really highlights the difference between a genuine artistic vision and just going through the motions. It's like they're saying something about the state of art and creativity in society.
And the way the film uses light and shadow also reinforces this. It's deliberate. You'll often see Rourke bathed in this bright light, symbolizing his integrity, his clarity of vision.
While others are often shrouded in shadow, it creates this visual shorthand, this stark divide between Rourke's world and the forces that are trying to control him. And it's not just about the buildings themselves. This visual storytelling extends to how characters are presented, their clothing, even how they're positioned within a scene.
It's true. The podcast spends quite a bit of time on Dominique and how her internal conflict is reflected visually. You see her in these elegant outfits, hinting at her sophistication, her intellect. But there's also the sense of restraint, almost as if she's physically confined by her own anxieties.
Amazing how the film can communicate so much about a character without them even saying a word. Every detail, from the set design to the costumes to the lighting, works together to create a deeper meaning.
It's a masterclass in visual storytelling, wouldn't you say? Engaging the viewer on multiple levels and making them think about these complex ideas in a really subtle but effective way.
Exactly. And that's what I love about this deep dive into a deep dive. It reminds us that even a fictional take on a classic film like The Fountainhead can still offer fresh perspectives and insights.
And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be looking at how this fictional podcast explores the film's lasting impact, its relevance today, and maybe even some fun behind-the-scenes tidbits.
Definitely a lot more to unpack. Stay tuned.
So this fictional podcast we're talking about, it digs into some pretty interesting behind-the-scenes stuff about the Fountainhead, like Did you know that Gary Cooper initially wasn't a fan of the novel at all?
Yeah, we touched on that earlier. Kind of surprising considering how well he embodies the character of Rourke. So what made him change his mind? What was it about the role that ultimately drew him in?
Maybe he saw it as a challenge, playing someone so different from his usual roles. Or maybe something about Rourke's unwavering spirit that really resonated with him on a deeper level.
It really shows you the power of acting, doesn't it? To
Yeah.
step into the shoes of someone, even someone whose views you might not personally agree with, and make them feel real, relatable.
Totally. And speaking of on-set dynamics, remember that off-screen romance between Patricia Neal, who played Dominique, and Gary Cooper?
Oh yeah, definitely adds a whole other layer to their on-screen dynamic.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, how much their real-life relationship might have influenced their performances.
Did their personal feelings add some extra depth to those scenes? Was there more vulnerability, more tension? Hard to say for sure, but it's definitely something to think about.
As a whole layer of intrigue, that's for sure. But beyond all the behind-the-scenes stuff, the podcast makes this really interesting point about the film's impact on audiences. They say that while Ayn Rand's novel was successful, it wasn't until the film adaptation that the public really grappled with its philosophical themes.
Right. It's like the film took these complex ideas and made them accessible, relatable.
It's the power of visual storytelling, I guess. People could see that clash between Rourke's individualism and societal pressures play out visually, emotionally. Maybe that's why it resonated with them on a deeper level.
Makes sense. The film didn't just retell the story. It elevated the novel's message, sparked all these conversations about individual creativity versus societal expectations, conversations that are still relevant today, by the way. Now, going back to that visual language for a second, I'm fascinated by how architecture becomes this metaphor for the characters' inner struggles.
Right, like the buildings themselves are extensions of their personalities, expressing their values and conflicts.
Exactly. So Rourke's buildings, for instance, they're all about clean lines, functionality, a sense of spaciousness. They mirror his clarity of purpose, his rejection of all that unnecessary ornamentation.
And then you've got the buildings designed by the folks who represent conformity, like Keating. Their work often feels cluttered, lacking that same sense of purpose or vision.
It's subtle but effective, right? The buildings become visual representations of their ideologies. And it's not just about the structures themselves either, it's how they're presented. The podcast highlights how the film uses light and shadow to reinforce this idea.
Yeah, that play of light and shadow is so deliberate. You often see Rourke bathed in this bright light, symbolizing his integrity, his unwavering vision.
While others are often shrouded in shadow, suggesting something more morally ambiguous, maybe even hidden agendas.
Such a powerful visual shorthand. He constantly reminds us of that chasm between Rourke's world and the world that's constantly trying to control him. And this visual language goes beyond the architecture, too. Think about Dominique Francon and her internal conflict.
Oh yeah, her clothing, the way she's positioned within a scene. The film does a beautiful job of capturing her struggle visually.
You see her in these elegant, sophisticated outfits, suggesting her intelligence and refined taste. But there's also this feeling of restraint, almost as if she's physically held back by her fears.
Amazing how much the film can communicate about a character's inner world without them ever having to say a word.
It all comes down to the details, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The set design, the costumes, the lighting, every element works together to create a deeper meaning.
And in the Fountainhead, all these elements come together to create this rich tapestry that really reflects the depth of the film's themes and ideas. Now, this fictional podcast, they're not afraid to acknowledge that the film's ending, while a victory for Rourke in a way, is far from a simple happy ending.
It's definitely bittersweet. He achieves his goal, but at a significant personal cost. It makes you think about how much you're willing to sacrifice for your principles.
Big question, right? Is there ever a point where the cost is simply too high, even for something as important as your creative vision?
Tough one. The film doesn't give us any easy answers, just makes us grapple with these questions about success, the compromises we make, the things we're willing to give up to achieve our goals.
It's interesting how this fictional podcast tackles the ending of The Fountainhead. They make a good point about how it's not your typical, happily ever after kind of ending.
It's definitely more complex than that. It is a win for Rourke, sure, but it's not a clean win. He goes through a lot to get there. Rejection, isolation, legal battles, you name it. It really makes you think about the sacrifices involved in sticking to your guns, staying true to your vision.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there's a point where the personal cost becomes too high, even when it comes to something as important as, say, your artistic vision.
It's a tough question. And the film doesn't give us any easy answers. It just lays it all out there, makes us grapple with these questions about what success really means, the compromises we make along the way, and what we're ultimately willing to give up to achieve our goals.
Right. It's not about telling us what to think,
Yeah.
but making us think, prompting us to ask those tough questions about
And
ourselves.
I think that's part of what makes this film so compelling. It's not just about Rourke's journey, but our own.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront our own values and choices. There's also that lingering ambiguity at the end, that sense that Rourke's fight isn't truly over. It's like the podcast says, maintaining your individuality in a world that often rewards conformity. Well, that's a constant battle, not a destination.
I think that's a really powerful message. It's like a reminder that staying true to yourself isn't something you just achieve and then you're done. It's a continuous process, this ongoing journey of self-discovery and reaffirmation.
It makes you think, how do we balance our own desires and needs with the expectations of the world around us? It's a question that resonates even today in a world that's constantly pushing us to conform.
Absolutely. The Fountainhead doesn't offer a clear-cut answer, but it encourages us to have that internal dialogue, to examine our own values, and to make choices that align with what we believe in, even if it means standing apart from the crowd.
And that's what makes this story so powerful and relevant even today. It's not about providing all the answers, but about asking the right questions, pushing us to reflect on who we are and what we want our lives to stand for. It's a journey worth taking, I'd say.
Couldn't agree more. It might just inspire you to embrace your own individuality, to create something truly meaningful and unique. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious what really resonated with you about The Fountainhead.
Was it Rourke's unwavering commitment to his vision? The way he refused to compromise his artistic integrity no matter the cost? Or maybe it was Dominique's struggle that struck a chord, that internal conflict between admiration and fear.
Or maybe it was the film's exploration of that tension between individual expression and societal expectations. Whatever it was, I think we can all agree. The Fountainhead is a film that stays with you long after you've seen it.
It definitely leaves you with something to ponder. How much are you willing to compromise to fit in? What price are you willing to pay to stay true to yourself? These are big questions, but they're worth asking as we navigate our own paths in a world that often pressures us to follow the same rules.
If you're looking to experience the full impact of The Fountainhead, I highly recommend seeking out either the film or the novel. It's an experience that will make you think, question, and maybe even inspire you to embrace your own unique path.
And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into The Fountainhead. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a thought-provoking piece of media.